Hello, my noble band of outlaws. Outlaw Samurai coming at you live with a video. Well, you saw the video title. And terreaformers. Why wasn't the crew armed? Now, I have a lot of things that don't make sense to me about the terreaformers and shit that should be changed. But to give you a brief backstory on the terreaformers, it's set in Earth. There's a horrid virus that's taking out Earth's population, and humanity decides it's going to terraform Mars. To do it, they send cockroaches and several breeds of moths to Mars in an attempt that the moths will convert Mars' atmosphere to something breathable, and the roaches will supply the recycling and the biological material needed for the moths to thrive. During the 500-year sprint between where they start and where they finished, Earth has a super virus going around, and the only way to cure it is through a DNA strand found on the super roaches on Mars, because after 500 years, they evolved into super roaches that are reminiscent of the extinct primate Gigantopithecus. And no matter what the memes will tell you, they are not representative of black guys. No, they are based off of the Gigantopithecus, an extinct species of super ape that lived during the Pleistocene era over 10,000 years ago. For those of you in the Bigfoot hunting circles, you'll recognize the name Gigantopithecus like that because a lot of people theorize that Gigantopithecus and Bigfoot are the same. That a strain or a population of Gigantopithecus were able to survive from the Pleistocene to the modern day, and they are what we would refer to as Bigfoot now. But in any case, on to the actual video at hand. So, the terreaformers in the anime are humans sent to Mars to gain the DNA from the cockroach. We actually follow the second expedition sent to Mars. The first expedition failed miserably. And the results of that were that the roaches got their hands on the bodies of several terreaformers and were able to evolve themselves. We won't find that out until later on in the show, but we get, as the crew is approaching Mars, some of the terreaformers sneak on the ship and kill a lot of the crew and destroy the thing that allows them to transform into their mutated forms known as the serum. The terreaformers have the ability to transform through a surgery and gain the powers of various insects and animals. By injecting themselves with a serum, they activate their powers. Now, you would think that this would be something that would mean they don't need the weapons. But A, it's only a temporary thing, and B, the more times you take the serum back to back to back, the further the mutation goes and the less reversible it is. So eventually you're stuck in a fully mutated form completely. Now, as I said, the expedition we follow is the second one. So the roaches have figured out that they need to destroy the serum. That's the first thing they do. They slaughter a bunch of people on the ship. It causes everyone to evacuate extremely quickly. The escape pods are jettisoned all over the damn planet, and we see all these different people from all these different countries, representatives, be shot all over Mars in small groups, and they eventually have to come back together when they find the crashed mothership. Now, why do they not have weapons? Well, they do have guns, which, to be frank, against the terreaformers, they're not doing a very good job, and here's why that is. For guns to be effective, you have to be able to lock onto your target, take aim, and fire. And this is the weakness of every ranged weapon, even guns, and that is you can lock on to a target. You can fire your projectile, but if that target moves in the last few microseconds before that bullet hits, or that missile hits, or that arrow hits, or whatever it is, it's going to completely miss. Not to mention the fact that, let's say, one of these roaches developed like diamond hard exoskeletons. Not all of them do, but some of them do have powers given to them by killing and presumably consuming the bodies from the previous expedition. So some of them could actually have like extremely hard exoskeletons that at certain angles will allow bullets to bounce off. And you may be thinking, well, Allah, that's not possible. Bullets always pierce. Look at bulletproof armor. And I don't mean bulletproof as in bullets won't penetrate it at all, or they just fall off like you're shooting at Superman's chest. No. The term bulletproof actually came from the 16th century, where armor makers, they would make a breastplate. When they made breastplates for 16th century medieval knights and men-at-arms and warfare, they would take a musket and they would shoot the breastplate. And if the breastplate dented, but the bullet didn't go through, or the bullet bounced completely off and it left a dent, that was bulletproof, as in it was tested against a bullet. It was proof that this breastplate will either deflect or stop a bullet at certain yards. Because as you go further out, a bullet loses its momentum, like all ranged weapons. Bullets just lose their momentum less than arrows. Now then, while they did have guns in the terraformers, because of how fast these roaches can move, these roaches can clear over 30 feet in literally the blink of an eye, because we see the roaches' speed. They clear a good 10 yards, which is about 30 feet, from point A to point B. Well, actually, they clear more than 30 yards, because originally the roach was standing by one of the guys in one of the scenes from 10 yards away. Clears him, rips the head off of his girlfriend from behind them. Fun fact, he's actually the captain of the Fun fact, the dude who watched his girlfriend's head get ripped off by a roach is actually the captain of the second expedition. Fun fact. But in any case, and we see that he's another 10 yards past where the captain is. So, in actuality, they can clear 60 feet, 20 yards, in less time than a human takes to blink. So these bastards are fast, and they are incredibly strong, with the ability to rip human limbs and heads completely off their bodies. But they're not invincible. While they are extremely strong, they do not have proportional durability. They can be injured quite easily. They have a similar biological structure to we humans. We humans can be incredibly physically strong, able to lift excess of 500 pounds. But at the end of the day, our durability does not also scale to our strength. Just because you can lift 500 pounds doesn't mean that if you fall down the stairs you won't twist your ankle or dislocate a bone. Now, that I've gotten all that out of the way, why do the terraformer crew not have melee weaponry? Especially given the fact that their surgeries put a lot of them, once they activate their insect form, their physical strength, durability, and everything, they scale to the creatures that they got it from. There's one guy in the show who gets the powers of a huntsman spider, and he's just completely slaughtering, ripping apart terraformers left and right while he's mutated. This would essentially be similar to giving Spider-Man a warhammer and telling him to go batshit crazy. Alright? Now, those of you who don't know, warhammers and by proxy, maces are very good at doing what they are intended to do, and that is bash open a human skull. Alright? So and especially since we see some of the mutants with some of the terraformer mutants that have pretty much pure brute strength builds, just backhand and completely rip off terraformer jaws, that melee weapons would be very, very, very effective in their hands. Right? Especially stuff like warhammers, halbergs, glaives. They would be able to slaughter these guys wholesale for three main reasons. One, because of their mutations, they would have the physical abilities to utilize these weapons in ways that humans physically can't, mainly longer durations and more acrobatic uses. Two, the terraformers don't have any weapons of their own aside from the few that have physical mutations, or the ones that just have straight hands, maybe the occasional one with a club. And three, because the terraformers are unarmed. If anyone who's ever had to fight an armed assailant will know that even something as insignificant as a pocket knife, while most people would see this as something that is insignificant in a fight, if you suddenly find yourself completely unarmed and your opponent is slashing at you with this, any attempt to stick your limb out into their range could actually cause you to get severely lacerated, especially if the blade is sharp. This could easily cut someone straight down to the bone with a good, powerful slice, especially to exposed flesh. Slice open the palm, or if you get them into a position, you could just slice open their neck. So, just by giving yourself some kind of weapon, even if it's something as insignificant as most people would assume a pocket knife to be, or something as substantial as a whole ass sword, can make all the difference in a fight, as I've said multiple times before. So arming the crew with melee weapons, like everyone gets their own personal melee weapon, or all of the escape pods have melee weapons in there, ready for you to use at a moment's notice, will drastically increase the chance of survival of the crew. Now, their whole point is to go there and capture one of these things alive. Which, yes, you can. There's nothing stopping you from doing that, but what about every other fucking roach that attacks you? You only need one or two, maybe three specimens alive for the research. The rest of them are fair game if they try to attack you. Now, the roaches do have astronomically large numbers on their side. But, given the fact that some of these guys were slaughtering these things left and right without weapons, just using their base powers, if you were to add weapons on top of their base powers, their combat effectiveness would immediately almost double to almost 10 times more. So let's say if they had no weapons, they slaughtered 10 of these things in 10 seconds. And then we give them a weapon that would essentially double their deadliness. That would make 20 roaches in 10 seconds. Quick math, 20 times 60, that would be 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120 roaches a minute. And that may not seem like a lot considering they have whole hordes, but if you have a whole team behind you that is, while they are mutated and mutation lasts, I think, for around 15 minutes. It's supposed to. That can be a substantial, staggering number. Because again, I said this would be a lengthy video. Quick math here. So 15 times 60 times 20 a minute. That would equate out to, if I did my math correctly, which I doubt I did, 18,000 roaches. If you manage to kill 20 roaches a minute. Wait a minute. Yeah, I think I did the... hold on, I think I did my math wrong. So, 60 times 20. Alright. So, times 15. No, it was right. 18,000 roaches, because I did 16 times 20 times 15. Okay. Yeah, 60 times 20 times 15. Yeah, so 18,000 roaches. Alright? And with an entire squad backing you up, if you're able to do this in very quick succession, that would enable you to cut down the horde significantly. Especially if you had a whole squad behind you. Let's say that all of you have, let's say that there are 10 equally mutated terraformers. So we take that 18,000 and immediately times it by 10. That's 180,000 roaches that could be killed by these guys just by giving them melee weapons. And that's just not with warhammers. Alright? The same can be said if we give them maces. Arguably, a mace would actually be even more deadly because it doesn't have any particular face that you need to have, and I use the sword term, edge alignment in order to hit with. You just basically have to swing it. You can even baseball bat swing this bastard for all you care, and it will still do damage because it is designed to crack open skulls. That's why these types of weapons were considered anti-armor weapons, because they bypassed the defense that armor gave by using brute force and concussive force. And I hear what you're saying. Well, Outlaw, there's a major thing that you haven't brought up. Very astute, my noble outlaws, and this is something I didn't bring up. Just a moment. On purpose. And that is training. It takes time to train people to be proficient with weaponry. I understand this. However, there is a very reasonable plot hole that we could take advantage of to have the people of the Terra Venture, which I believe is the name of the ship, be able to be trained. And that is that there is actually a 6-month period between when they leave Earth and are supposed to land on Mars. Meaning that the people of the people on the ship have a whole 6 months to train and get accustomed to their weaponry. And even if most of... And here's the thing. It does not take a lot of training to be proficient with weapons like a mace, or a warhammer. And I hear what you're saying, but what about like binding and winding techniques? Those are techniques when you're fighting against an equally intelligent human that is using another weapon that you have to bind and parry and even trip your opponent. The roaches, while intelligent, are not completely human-level intelligent. And because they're not going to be using weapons themselves, true, you could still teach people how to sweep the leg or hook a roach, knocking them off balance and then coming down for the final blow. But you do not have to go nearly as in depth with the martial training as you would if you're trying to train somebody to fight another human. It's the argument of Monster Hunter versus Duelist. And nothing exemplifies this more than The Witcher, for example. A lot of people say that the techniques in The Witcher aren't practical for fighting. And I say, hold on, what are we fighting here? Because if we're fighting monsters that we don't have to worry about them using complex counterattacks, then all of a sudden spinning and turning become much more valuable, because it's easy to spin or turn yourself out of the way of a charging attack than it is to try to just jump out of the way, because spinning and turning your way out of the attack allows you to instantly put yourself in a new stance and ready to face whatever it is you're charging. Whilst on the other end of the spectrum, in an actual judicial duel, this could be dangerous because you have an opponent that could take an advantage and stab you in the back. But this is the same argument. Because the terraformers are not going to be fighting experienced duelists, an army of experienced soldiers and duelists, we don't need to go as in depth with the training. Just really all you'd really have to do is train them to be basically like this. The blunt end hits the skull part. The smashy part hits the soft spot. Basically like that scene from Zorro with Antonio Banderas. Yes, the pointy end goes into the other end. Goes into the other man. Though unlike in this instance, he's actually quite right in this context. So you wouldn't actually have to worry too much about training them in the more intense, more technical martial aspects. Just basically showing them how to do it, have them practice how to do it, and of course we're also going to have to include sparring, because some people will want to learn the more martial end of things, but most people will want to just pick up a weapon and use the human instinct of Oonga Boonga Smash. And in those retrospects, maybe Warhammer wouldn't be the best choice for them. Honestly, I would pretty much exclusively teach people how to use a mace against the terraformers. Though Warhammers do also have the advantage, this one doesn't because I made it out of a pool noodle. But most of the time, Warhammers will have a beak at the other end for piercing, and sometimes will actually have a small spear or spike at the top for piercing as well, and then you also have the hammerhead. Now, I believe I mentioned before that aside from just Warhammers and clubs and such like that, some of you may remember this from an old video I made. It was the original prototype of my Naginata, before I made the prototype 2, the Zombie Nata. But you could also train them in how to use spears and, like I said before, Naginata, glaive, whatever you want to call it. poleaxe, halberd. But spears are also quick to learn. It's real easy. It's almost human instinct to pick up a sharp, pointy stick and try to stab something. Add a decent cutting blade on it, and you could teach the basics of how to use a spear, which can transition easily into using a naginata. Personally, if I was going to arm them, I would give them hewing spears, glaives, or naginata. Well, glaive / hewing spear. Naginata doesn't have the thrusting aspect too well. But definitely a hewing spear, which is a spear that is basically designed to cut and thrust. If you've ever seen the cold steel boar spear, that's an example of a hewing spear that's able to cut and thrust. So, arm them with spears as well. Also, spears can be thrown. So, javelins may also be useful if any of them have any experience in high school sports. Arm them with javelins. That way you take a lot of the excess training out of the equation. If you find out that anyone has prior weapon handling experience, even if it was just in like a club, because since this is in Japanese, a lot of girls take Kyudo, which is the Japanese form of shooting a bow. Bows would be pretty much useless against terreaformers because they also possess the ability to dodge bullets in some cases. But a lot of females also still practice using the naginata. So giving them a hewing spear, anyone with prior experience using a naginata, even if you give them a hewing spear which is cut and thrust, they will be able to transfer the techniques from the naginata over to the hewing spear with minimal to little difficulty. So there's also spears that we could upgrade them with. I'm mainly suggesting weapons that historically have a low training time in order to get decent proficiency with. And because I know y'all are going to ask me about this, well, Outlaw, then where do swords come into the play here? And I hear you, because we see in the anime the character Joseph, he actually has a sword. It's a kind of like a sci-fi longsword, but he has a sword, and he just decimates the damn terreaformers like they're nothing, slicing through these bastards like they're made of tissue paper. And there's another sword in the anime that the actual main character gets his hands on towards the end, but then loses again, something like that. I don't exactly remember. But we see that Joseph is slicing through the hordes like they're nothing. And we see that, well, Joseph is a wild card because unlike the rest of them, he's actually a result of natural biological experimentation through his family. Joseph's family basically engaged in selective breeding for years, not picking partners based on looks or status in society or money. No, they picked their partners based on genetics, intelligence, and physical ability. Basically breeding him into basically trying to breed a super soldier all natural. And Joseph is supposed to be the peak of human evolution in the show. So he doesn't actually have a transformation. He's just using his own natural strength and abilities. But he's still slicing through the hordes. And we see Joseph, we also learn that Joseph has military training and a very high academic background. So he obviously would have some training with swords. But even in this instance, you could still train a decent swordsman in 6 months to combat enemies like the terreaformers. Because it doesn't take much sword skill to cut down an unarmed opponent, okay? There's nothing really that they could do. Terraformer sticks out its arm, you slice off the arm, and then by using the momentum, you can bring the sword back up and attempt to slice off their head. Or in a more accurate biomechanically advantageous way, just slice them across the chest, or eviscerate their internal organs when they fall down. Then you just executioner style cut off the head. Which, yes, I know, outlaw, that takes an incredible amount of skill, and it's not easily done. I get it. That's why executioner swords were made. Executioner swords are swords that are specifically made to be able to take off a human head in one swing. They basically take the guesswork out of it. Because to cleanly cut through a human head in one swing, you need to put your sword between the vertebrae of the neck and bring it down with significant force in order to cut through all the cartilage and the soft bits and not run into any bone that would slow you down. Another reason why the guillotine was invented. The guillotine was actually invented, as far as I'm aware, to take the guesswork out of public executions, because they got very gory and very disturbing. Good executioners in the day were hard to find. The ones that could take your head off in one clean swing and not make you suffer. But yes, even only given 6 months of training, you could become proficient enough in the way of the sword to be able to handle yourself against the terraformers if you had the physical augmentations to fight them. Are you going to slice through hordes and hordes and hordes of them? Probably not, because again, swords have an extremely high difficulty rating in terms of trying to learn quickly. Because even when you think that you've reached a point in your swordsmanship where, oh, I'm invincible, no one can beat me, and you go to use your signature attack, and your opponent just beep, scores a point. There's always going to be someone stronger, someone better, blah, 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 blah. But what I'm getting at here is that while you're not going to be able to take on master-level swordsmen in a fight, completely unarmed, unarmored humanoids, you should be able to cut down fairly easily. Now, is there going to be a large group of swordsmen? Probably in the very beginning. But most people will actually give up, counting on human nature, where most people, if it's too difficult for them to learn, or they perceive it to be too difficult to learn, they give up and move to something easier. Learning to use a mace and learning to use a sword are two completely different beasts. This one is aided by the human instinctual drive to pick up any object and just start swinging and bashing at something like a caveman. This one requires fine motor control and precise movement in order to get the full effect out of. So basically, caveman, Homo sapien. Caveman, Homo sapien. Neanderthal, Homo erectus. Neanderthal, Homo erectus. Allah spitting scientifical facts at ya. But yeah, swords I would also give them swords, maybe not as many. I would definitely relegate the swords more to people who have any prior background or show promise given how short a time span we have. But to sum it all up, the weapons that I would predominantly be providing the people of the Annex 1 would be... bloody hell, I lost my damn hammerhead. In any case, I would give them the maces, the war hammers, and spears, whilst also integrating swords sparsely. But what do you think, my noble band of outlaws? Outlaws, I don't know. Outlaw Samurai tells all y'all be crazy men to be safe in using weapons, and tell me what you think about my rantings down in the comments below. This is an unavoidably long video. I'll say that. I'm out. Peace.